This is a Nice Guys Patreon exclusive.
Welcome to a Nice Guys Patreon exclusive. This is a bonus edition of the Patreon exclusive videos here. Ian Cameron, Alex B. Smith, and we are here for a very special reason to remember the life and the legacy of a good friend of ours, veteran Las Vegas sports bettor and handicapper and radio personality, Smokin' Dave Cokin. And to join us to help remember the great man that is Dave Cokin, Dana Lane, and Scott Spreitzer joining us. I'll be brief because of all four of us, I probably knew Dave the least, but I did have interactions with him. I remember a young Alex B. Smith and Ian Cameron were at a certain super contest weekend a couple of times about 8 to 10 years ago. And I certainly made a point of it to introduce myself to Dave and talk to him for a few minutes and just a great conversation about life, his own life, and how his career had been and sports in general, various sports, and only a few minutes conversation, but enjoyed it the few times that I talked to Dave when I was in town. I was lucky enough, and I know Alex was as well, to do a regular spot with him and with Matt Humans on the Las Vegas Sports Line on ESPN Las Vegas Radio. That was a spot I did quite a bit, talking CFL, NHL, NFL, you name it. And it was always apparent to me, we know Dave is a handicapper, one of us trying to make money, make this a full-time life career for himself. And I remember that part of it, and obviously very successful at it and a great handicapper. But what a great radio personality this man was too. Entertaining. If something got under his skin, whether it was a team, a player, a coach, you name it, he would not hesitate to let people know about it. Some of his rants were legendary, and I know I've got the Dave Cokin in me from time to time. When it comes to being able to rant and rave about certain issues. And that's always something that I felt, wow, Dave he's got a great radio presence. When you're going to do something on radio, yes, you want to be informative, but you've got to engage the listener. You got to be entertaining. You've got to make sure they keep coming back the next day, the next week, the next month to keep listening to your show. Dave Cokin could keep you entertained. Once you got hooked listening to Dave, you weren't going anywhere else. And I think that was another great skill and trait that he had as far as a career. He was always funny, humorous as well. And it was great to hear some of the quips that he would have over time. And just my interactions with him were nothing but pleasant. Absolutely. And the times I got to do radio hits with him were equally enjoyable. I still thank Matt Humans, who I still do some stuff with VSiN with him on a weekly basis. And I'll always thank them for, making time for me, little old Ian Cameron from just outside Hamilton, Ontario, a long-suffering Ticat season ticket holder and fan of the CFL. I can sympathize with Dana, who we were talking off air with the Pittsburgh Pirates, causing him all kinds of grief all these years. I know what it's like being a fan of a team that's not giving you the wins you are hoping for. But I'll tell you what, I thank Matt Humans and I thank Dave for opening up the door to me on the Las Vegas Sports Line. And like I said, the interactions I've had with Dave, albeit very few and very brief, enjoyable. And we lost a great man and a great pillar of this industry without question. We'll miss you, Dave, and rest in peace. Alex, thoughts on the great Dave Cokin?
Yeah, I mean, it's a massive loss for me on a level of different things because I mentioned it on Facebook when he passed. I said there's no Alex B. Smith Sports without Dave Cokin. I was a little kid in Chicago. I basically had just free reign on Saturday mornings to the living room and flipping around. And I wasn't a cartoons kid. I watched sports. So before football came on at 11 a.m., flip around and look for different things. I stumbled across this show. These guys sitting around the table. They were talking about football, but it didn't look like anything on ESPN, and it didn't sound like anything on ESPN. And it happened to be Proline. And it's Scott Spreitzer and it's Dave Cokin and Jim Feist, and watch these guys. And, I thought it was just a compelling show. And it was just an interesting take on sports. And of course, I'm 5-6 years old. I knew about football, but I didn't know exactly all the intricacies of the gambling and the line and things of that nature. As I get older and learn about that, and I just gamble as a casual, I'm a high schooler in Chicago, just making casual $5-10 bets. And then all of a sudden things go to where, I move away from home and end up finding myself in the midst of this career. And it's like I said, Dave and Matt Humans and, the Las Vegas Sports Line, they give him one of my first spots on radio. And, I off of Twitter, basically, people started noticing me from there. Scott had me on his show, doing the pregame stuff as well, and just building off of that momentum. And then later on to actually be able to work alongside Dave. And that's why I'm wearing this hoodie. He always talked about his team, the Providence Reds. He said the first bet he ever made when he was a kid, he was 5 years old, put $5 on the Providence Reds. And I went back and watched the shows, and he had this hoodie on. He had a red version of this hoodie on. And it was the first thing I went and grabbed and ordered after he passed, and as a tribute to him, because I would not be doing this now. We wouldn't have this great of a show in this magnitude without him. He was such an inspiration to me in the handicapping field, and just kind of learning things from him and understanding, me being a hardcore fan, but to know that I have to separate that from, what's going on with the numbers, and I can't take this personally, and just the little things that are what make us different from just the actual average, the casual better, having that discipline and having that drive and making this still be professional, but also never losing your spirit as a fan either. I think Dave told that line very well, and that was incredibly inspirational to me and will always be inspirational to me. So it's a huge loss. He was just such straightforward, straight shooter kind of person. That's the kind of personality that I want to be in my life. He's like I said, I don't say I have too many inspirations in my life. Dave Cokin was and still is and will be forever an inspiration in my life. So he would really be missed.
Well said, Alex. Indeed. And that's why we wanted to do this special Dave Cokin tribute, because this is the Ice Guys. This is an NHL hockey betting show. No one was more passionate about watching hockey or betting hockey, very few, than Dave Cokin. Dave Cokin loved hockey, okay? And he was always someone that was willing to give hockey the time of day. It's always struggled to be, on the level of football and basketball and the conscience of the American sports fan. But at the same point in time, the people that love hockey, we all do, Dave Cokin did, they really love it. That's what I say. Don't try to appeal to the masses. The people that love hockey, even if it's a smaller volume of people, they really love it. They're hardcore about it. They know how awesome this sport is, and Dave Cokin did as well. He loved hockey. He knew a lot about every sport. That's why he was a successful handicapper. And like I said, he was able to do that and be a great radio personality, almost multitask on a daily basis, and that's what made him great. Dana Lane, your recollections and memories of Dave Cokin?
Yeah, it's right around the same, and I cannot wait to hear what Scott has to say, because I didn't realize how long you guys have been close. And I mean, Alex knows, the way I felt, and to this day still feel, when I think of Brian Blessing, who meant so much to me. I know how Scott feels, because believe me, if I think more than 5 seconds about Brian, I've got to look away and think about something else. Because that's what he meant to me, because he fulfilled this void that maybe I didn't even know that I didn't have. But as far as Dave is concerned, like you, Alex, I was a little kid. I loved sports. That was my entire life. There was nothing I like music too, that, Alex, but I love sports. That's who I am. That's who I identified with. As soon as I would go down, and I'm, from upstate New York, and I would go down to the local, news rack every day. And I knew right around this time, when the air started getting crisp, I knew football magazines were coming out. And I know it's kind of silly to kind of say this, but my heroes, when I picked up those magazines, because they hit me up here, they hit me intellectually, because it was something like, oh, there's something there that really I identify with. And I saw Dave, I saw Jim Feist, all the guys that, the old school guys that we all know. And unfortunately, those were the guys that I thought, if this sports thing doesn't work out, and if someday I'm not able to play, this seems something that's talking to me. This seems something that's calling my name, something I want to be part of. And those were my heroes. I remember closing the door and calling these numbers. And actually some of these, some of the numbers you would get somebody to talk to. And I would say, hey, look, this is really what I want to do. I'm like 14 years old. This is what I want to do. And I'm imagining Dave, and I'm imagining Jim, and I'm thinking, I want to do that because this is who I am. I'm a very statistical, very analytical. Before we even knew what analytics was, that's who I was as a kid. And then lucky enough, I mean, the world would have it. I went in the Air Force, got stationed out here at Nellis 32 years ago. And that was my drive and that was my passion. And I got to meet Dave, got to meet Larry Ness, got to meet, never met Jim yet, but I keep DMing him. He was big time, but he is big time, so he should. But all these guys, I'm like, those were kind of my heroes because I identified with who they were and what they did. And of course, I went to school for broadcasting, and I married the two at some point. But I remember the first time I met Dave, and we were doing the Stardust line, and I was, I'm a stupid kid now. Now I'm just a stupid adult, but I went in there like not even having a clue what I was saying. And Dave, you could pick up on the fact that he recognized that and coddled me through the show. And it was something I will never forget. Now, he wasn't a guy that was going to put his arm around you. I remember doing shows with him a little bit later, and I'm thinking, okay, I'm a little bit better now, right? Not too much better, but we were doing the shows, at the old studios, and I would think, man, after the show, he's going to really say, hey, great job, this and that, and the show ended, and there goes Dave, and I'm just like this puppy that wants to be petted, and it's like, I guess I did okay because the producer at the time was saying, well, he would have told you if you didn't do well. So,
yeah.
Okay, great. But I don't think he ever knew, and I wish I got closer to him because I don't think he ever knew how much he meant to me and how much of an influence he had. And like Brian, I don't think these guys understand how much of a reach they actually had on people that they had no clue that they influenced. So yeah, to lose somebody like that is to lose somebody that I really put on a pedestal, not because, look, as you get older, you realize you kind of fall into your own lane. But the one thing that he did, and Ian, you said this, when you listen to him on the air, he had a way about him to draw you into everything he was saying, to make he sounded believable. Like this is a guy who knew what he was talking about, and his passion for the NHL was actually second to none. And really, like Brian, those were guys, 30 years ago, 25 years ago, I would hear them talk about hockey, and that was it. That was all your hockey you were going to get around here. And all of a sudden, everybody's an expert now. But I appreciate him. I appreciate what he meant to my childhood. I appreciate, doing numerous shows with him. And also, Ian, like you said, I appreciate Matt Humans too, because he gave, it sounds like all of us are start at some point, putting us on the paper. But Dave was always this driving force with other guys to say, that's the level I want to be at. That's who I want to be. I gave him a shot. I'll never be Dave Cokin, but I do appreciate him lighting that fire. And it sounds like he's been a tremendous influence. And to you, Scott, I give you my 1000% condolences, because I know that he was a guy that you loved, and not looked up to, a man you loved. And that's the way I felt about Brian. And I'm so sorry for your specific loss.
No, it's a loss for certainly for Scott. It was like just almost like a brother, not just a friend, a brother to Dave.
It was a big brother.
All these years, years and decades, quite honestly. But it's been a tough 6 or 7 years for some of the losses we've suffered in the Las Vegas and the betting community. Dave Malinsky. My heart sunk and just gut wrenched when I heard of that years ago. Brian Blessing, it was horrible that day when I found that out, because I've also done stuff with Brian on radio with Gabe and Cam. My gosh, Morency and Cam Stewart, who were dear friends of Brian Blessing.
Brian loved those guys.
Loved them. It was, you talk about radio gold, Brian Blessing with those two fucks. Gabe and Cam, it was just spectacular stuff. Brian's loss, it just really hurt. And certainly Dave Cokin just recently as well. Those are the three that stand out, where it's just my heart sunk when I heard the news, with Malinsky, with Brian Blessing, and with Dave Cokin. I'll say this before I pass it to Scott. You couldn't listen to Dave Cokin. You must have been living under a rock, or you couldn't hear the radio properly if you didn't know after listening to Dave Cokin on the radio every day that checking out Mastriani's and Joe's Steaks place to eat in Las Vegas every day. Oh, Mastriani's.
It's the only reason I ever went to Shucks.
Yeah.
You guys remember that?
But
And
I
wait, and
respected Dave so much that the first time I went to Las Vegas, after, I was already listening to Dave's radio on that's why I was on the show, LV Sportsline. I'd listen to it. I checked out Mastriani's. I ate there. I checked out Joe's Steak and Seafood and Stone Crab House, and I ate there, and they were great spots. He was 1,000% right.
I'll never forget the first year that I did that show, and when they had that ad running, I went back home to Chicago for Christmas. There's a Joe's in Chicago, and I went, and I'm like, my mom's all excited about steaks, and my dad's all excited about steaks. I said, nope, I have to get the Dover sole. It's like, they always mention the Dover sole. So I'm like, I'm getting this Dover sole. I tried it, and it was fantastic. And I remember DMing him afterwards saying, like, you finally got it, and it's amazing. So yeah, definitely. So he drove a lot of people to any ad that he mentioned. I'm sure he drove a lot of people to those places for sure.
I remember having lunch with Dave at Joe's one time, and this was a big moment for me. But of course, I had to keep my composure because I didn't want him to think that it was. And I remember the one thing he said to me over the biggest shrimp I've ever seen in my life. He said, I ain't cheap, and I've been doing this a long time, and I'm not a cheap handicapper. And I'm just thinking to myself, man, I'd do anything for $20, man. You are so, you are the God that I knew you were. Because I am so cheap, Dave. I even brought my own shrimp.
The best part about this whole thing thus far is Alex talking about the Dover sole.
Yeah.
Because I used to tease Coke. I was like, Coke, and that's blue-haired food. Come on, man. I'm like, Dover sole? And like, oh, yeah, you don't have to worry. You got no hair. So,
So, Scott, before I officially pass it to you, because you were as close to Dave Cokin as anybody, I hate to do this to you, but I got it. Here we go on the screen right here. There we go. From the Pro Line days. There you see it. Scott's second on the right there. And at the far end at the left, there you see Dave Cokin. The Pro Line days. Jim Feist there sitting beside Cokin. I believe that's Big Al McMorty to the left of Scott Spreitzer. And actually, Big Al checks in with me every now and then and says, how are you doing? And I appreciate that. For sure. And actually, it's funny about Jim Feist. Dana Lane Thompson, I wanted to meet him. I never have. Years ago, before my old Twitter got taken over by hackers, I'd see Jim Feist retweeting some of my stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Honestly. And I'm like, am I saying something that's impressive to Jim Feist? Wow, that's pretty cool.
And you know what? He sent me a message, I think, once or twice, and I'm thinking, oh, this is my end. This guy, here we go. We're going to be buds. And I sent him a DM, and I'm thinking, hey, would you like to grab some lunch one time? And I must have checked that thing every day for a month. Apparently, he doesn't eat lunch, and no, he does not. So,
Dana, I will set that up. You, me, and Jim. I talk to Jim 5 times a week, and we still do lunch about once every 6 weeks. We'll get you day and time. Dom DeMarco's on a Tuesday afternoon, if you can make it. That's why we'll end up here in Las Vegas, and I'll introduce you to Jim. That set right there, I think that was the final, what's the word I'm looking for, iteration or version of ProLine. That was like the last year or two.
Have to be.
Yeah, and you're looking at 3 of my closest friends there when you talk about Cokin, Feist, and Big Al McMorty, still to this day. I mean, Jim and I talk almost every day of the week. And then Al McMorty, Cokin, and I are night owls. So I'm talking to McMorty about midnight, 1 a.m. Pacific time, at least 5 nights a week. I will say this about Dave before Ian officially throws it to me, that, I'm not a big Twitter guy. I'm not a big social media guy. I do a little bit more on Facebook because those are my, friends and relatives and all that kind of stuff. And I rarely talk business on Facebook. And Cokin was big on Twitter, as you guys know. And he used to tell me all the time, why don't you share some of this on Twitter? Dave, is just not my thing. Plus, you're the guy I text back and forth with 25 times a night watching games. You're my cathartic release or whatever you want to call it. And I don't have that anymore. And it's still, I'm going to say in the last 4 or 5 days, it finally stopped. And he's been gone now since July 30th, early morning hours. Here we are, almost October 1st. And up until about 4 or 5 days ago, something wild would happen in a game. Shohei getting his 50th home run, his 50th stolen base. And for a split second, I reached for my cell phone to text Cokin because we talked 15 times a day, at least on our, texting back and forth, going way back to when you could first start texting all those years ago. And like I said, here we are a month and a half later, or almost 2 months later, and I still reach for the phone for that split second. And then it dawns on me right before I grab the phone, I don't have him here to do it anymore. So it's been tough. And I know what you're talking about, Dana, with Brian. It's a tough loss, no doubt about it. And if you guys want, I can tell you how it all started, and I can tell you right up until now my relationship.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
Yeah, just as you get into that, absolutely, the life and the journey you had with the great Dave Cokin. The floor is yours, Scott.
Cool thing about Dave that all of you guys have mentioned. Excuse me, I was chomping on a piece of ice there. The cool thing about Dave is that he gave us all a start in his own way, in our own way too. Mm-hmm. I'm 14 or 15 years younger than Dave. And so my first radio gig job, whatever you want to call it, I was 21. It was 1988. And it was here in Las Vegas. I moved to Vegas when I was 17, fresh out of high school. And I got a job in 1988 at a radio station here in town. And the format was basically sports. It was basically live games. It was like we covered UCLA football, Angels baseball, things like that. And then we also had like paid for spots. Like I actually engineered the Iranian American show. So there you go. But anyway, and I'm not Iranian. But anyway, so we had shows like that we've had on when we weren't talking or weren't having the sports games. And so we also covered boxing. And the program director at the time, or sports director, I should say, was a guy by the name of Seat Williams, who had a big name in Vegas for 30 years. Still to this day, one of my all-time closest friends. And he used to call me his little brother. Seat was about 8 years older than I. And I remember the first time I was cutting a spot at KLAV Radio in Commercial Center, Las Vegas, with a board, an on-air board that was held together with paper clips and whatever else you could imagine. And I'm in the editing bay, and I'm putting together a commercial for an upcoming UCLA game. Brought some of my albums in. I've got Grandmaster Flash. I got a little Parliament Funkadelic. So Seat Williams walks in, 8-9 years older than me, and he goes, and by the way, my hair was Bon Jovi-ish. This is 88, right? I had hair back then. So Seat Williams walks in, he looks at me, he goes, I've seen you around the studio this week. I'll try to do his voice. He goes, the hell you doing with G-Master Flash? Just like that. So we hit it off. So we became really close friends. And he and Dave Cokin used to do a lot of boxing on local radio. And I was what you are when you first started radio. I was the board op, producing shows, things of that nature. And I remember it was a Michael Dokes fight. And I remember Cokin and Seat were calling the fight. I'm back in the studio and I'm operating the board. And you hear that Cokin voice, unmistakable voice. And I'm like, man, this is cool. So then like a couple more fights goes by. I've never met the guy yet. We're 3 fights and maybe 3 weeks into my radio career, if you want to call it that. And I'm sitting there one afternoon and I'm in the studio and I'm just operating the board or whatever. And the doors open to the studio and I hear these two guys talking outside of the lobby. So I hear Seat, and then all of a sudden I hear, I'm trying to remember this exactly the way he said it, and I can't do his voice, but I'm going to give it a shot anyway. All of a sudden I hear, hey, he's nothing more than a tomato can with a good right jab. And I busted up. I'm like, that's Cokin. I got to get out there and meet this guy. So I walk out in the lobby. I introduce myself to him. And we became close friends right there, man, right there on the spot. And by close friends, I mean he knew my daughter. He knew my wife. He got his insurance through my wife. My wife is in that business. He knew my father before he passed away, my dad, my mom, my brothers. I mean, 8 months ago, he's unable to talk. I pick him up at his place, and we're heading over to Nora's Italian. I'm a Nora's Italian guy. He was a Mastroianni's. We had a lot of arguments, but both places are great. But anyway, I picked him up. I met my brother and Jim Feist at Nora's for a bite to eat. Cokin, unfortunately, couldn't eat. He was down to drinking protein drinks, but he just wanted to be around the guys. And he couldn't talk at this point. He couldn't talk the last year that he was alive. He would try. It was real hard. You had to really pay attention to make out what he was saying. But he wanted to go. And I'm like, Dave, I'm not holding back. I'm ordering what I always do. I go, if you can't handle sitting there looking at some, sea bass and, some fried calamari to start. And I go, then you better not show up because, I ain't got no sympathy for your ass, like that, which he loved that stuff, the last year. And so he goes there and he's drinking his protein drink. And I'm like, God damn, Dave. And in fact, that day I ordered veal parm, which is the best bone-in veal parm at Nora's. There you go. I should get a free dinner for that. So I'm sitting there and I'm cutting up my veal parm and I'm like, oh, dip it in the sauce. I'm a Coke. This is so good. I'm like, man, are you missing out? Just messing with the big time. But the thing about Dave, so I met him that first time. And we did a lot of shows at that radio station. And then he and Seat said to me, you need to host a morning line show, betting line show. And at the time in Vegas, there was the Stardust, who I think was Lee Pete and the great late Jim Brown at the time, Cleveland Browns. So they were the hosts. And I was doing a Monday through Friday morning show called Sunrise Sports. It was all about the point spread. And it was an hour a day every morning. I'd get done working at 11 o'clock at night at KLAV, back there at 7 o'clock in the morning to do this 1 hour sports show. And what happened was, as a couple years later, 1990, 91, I get a phone call from Seat. He goes, hey, man, I just got offered the host gig for Fridays and Saturdays of the Stardust. And he goes, I want you and Cokin to be on with me, be my guys. Oh, let me think about it. Yes, about 100 times before I could even think. So I'm 23, 24 years old, co-hosting the Stardust line. Those guys were already 10 stars. I was 1.5 star. They brought me along. You got two guys who are, one of them's 8 years older than me. One of them's 15 years older than me, seasoned veterans. And here comes this guy hanging on to his Bon Jovi haircut, trying to jump in where I could with these guys. So I did the Stardust. We ended up doing Saturday nights after the first year was Friday, Saturdays. Then the contest started. Did Saturdays 10 to midnight for about 5 years. And then it just got to the point where I had other things I had to do. But Cokin, like you guys, you talked about what he did for you guys. He calls me one day and he goes, listen, Pete Rose and I want you on the show on Fridays for college football season. I think this was 96. And I'm saying, oh, that'd be great, because he would do his Friday show from the MGM. I'd get done doing some stuff with the Feist office, run over to the MGM, do the Pete Rose show for a season. And then we just started doing more and more shows together, Cokin and I. Every time he had a chance, he had me on his show. But we became friends. And I remember and I'm going back a little bit, 1994, I'm in the Philippines just hanging out with some friends who live over there in Makati. And the Rangers were my favorite team, hockey team, by far since I was a little kid, which makes sense because I grew up in Omaha, Nebraska. So anyway, the Rangers are my favorite hockey team. Yeah, exactly. So I'm over in the PI just hanging out for 3 or 4 weeks. And there's no texting, there's no cell phones, but I call Cokin before the final game, before game 7. It's like 24 hours, ahead of time. Now over there, the game's starting at like 8 o'clock in the morning, Makati, Manila, Philippine time. But I'm calling him the day before and I'm like, Cokin, just put it up there right now, man. Messier's taking us to the cup, blah, blah, blah. And you can barely hear on the landlines. You're talking on landlines halfway across the world. So I'm messing with him. You got no chance, Brian. You got no chance, Vancouver, And so anyway, make a long story short, I guess I got to go back to the Philippines for the Rangers to win a cup again, because it's been 30 years and it was 50 years prior to that. But I mean, I could go into so much detail. I did some work for the IHL Las Vegas Thunder. Yeah. A buddy of mine and we used to track what other teams were doing on shorthanded situations, power plays. And then in between periods, we'd run them down to the coaches. So I got to work with, not Marty McSorley, spacing his name now, Brian McSorley. Marty's younger brother was a coach there for a while. Butch Goring was the first coach of the Thunder. So I'm running these down to them after each period, show what they're doing, all this kind of stuff. Afterwards, we'd all head to the Cy Red Room at the Thomas and Mack, which was where you had your post-game drinks. Alex will be glad to hear that Chris Chelios was one of the guests up there a couple times. I'm going to tell you right now, Chelios could do his share. So we're up there, and we're sitting there having a good time. Cokin comes over to my table, and he goes, so what are you doing afterwards? I'm like, well, it's 10 o'clock at night. I probably should go home. I got to be at the Feist office at 7 a.m. Nah, come on. We're going to the Satin Saddle. What the hell is the Satin Saddle? Ends up being this topless joint, owned by the people, which Cokin, had a tendency to go to. Yep. It was owned by the same people who own a very classy gentleman's club here in town. It was definitely the B&C club. But, Cokin dug that stuff. So Dave and I went there, and I tell you what, we never told each other where we were going to be on Fridays and Saturdays, the rest of his partying times, and we'd still run into each other somewhere. I'd hear that voice. I'd walk in a club. I'd walk in a Shark Club or a bar. Hey, what's going on? I could hear him talking, holding court somewhere. But Dave and I, at the very end, he called me the day he found out. I'll start making a short story out of this long story. He called me, I think it was May of 23. And he didn't call me, he was texting. He goes, "Well, I'm going in to find out what's going on, man. I, can't talk anymore and, having all these pains or whatever." And so he went into the hospital, and the next day he texted me and he goes, "Ain't good, man." His text said, "Ain't good." He goes, "It's terminal." He goes, "I got head and neck cancer." He goes, "There's nothing they're going to be able to do for me." And so, you talk a little bit back and forth for maybe 5 minutes. And he goes, "Enough already. Who do you like in baseball tomorrow?" Swear to God, 5 minutes into the talk. "Who do you like in baseball tomorrow? I'm stuck in this hellhole," which is what he called the hospital. And so the next day or two, he was told he could have in-hospice care or home care, where the hospice would come and check on him like 3 days a week. And of course, the final couple months, it was every day of the week. And that's what he chose. And he would text me, "What are you doing tomorrow night?" I'm like, "Not much. What's up? Come on over, man. Let's watch a game." So I would. And he would try to talk. He couldn't understand. So we ended up texting. We're 5 feet away from each other. He's texting and I'm talking. One of the last times I saw him when he was really coherent and still feeling pretty good was the Game 7 NHL Stanley Cup clash. And I went over to his house to watch at his apartment. And we sat there and just had a blast. And I knew it was a little bit different that night because he wanted to show me everything he did for baseball, as far as how he went about handicapping. Even though he knew I had my own thoughts and we exchanged plays every day, he had legal papers and legal pads. He must have had 5 of them. And he's like sitting there next to me on the couch and he's pointing and he goes, "Just remember this stuff. Just remember this stuff. I know." He's like, "I know you're a good, baseball handicap. Just remember this stuff." And he's texting me, trying to talk. And I just thought there was 2 things going on there. I felt really touched because the guy wanted to share something with me that he had been working on for 60 years. And also I was sad because, and hid that, but I was sad because I knew this guy knows he's about out the door, and it was one of those situations. Saw him one more time. We were supposed to see each other on this one Tuesday or Wednesday, the final week he was around. And he texted me about 10 o'clock in the morning and he goes, "Scott," he goes, we can't get together tonight." He goes, "I'm feeling pretty out of it. I'm going to just sleep the rest of the day." Well, it was like, 2 days later, he's taken to hospice, and a couple of days after that is when he was gone. But the guy lived his own way, man. I'm telling you, this guy lived his life his way more than anybody I've ever known. And I value his friendship. I value the fact that I think of him as my brother. He's a part of my family and always will be. He had his ashes spread in Rhode Island, in different parts of Rhode Island where he grew up. And I wish I could have been there. But we held 2 events for him. We had a public event at a bar here in town, at an Oasis bar. I bet you 150 people must have shown up throughout the night, which just shows you how well known and well liked this guy was. And then at Mastriani's, a couple weeks later, he had his favorite 15 or 16 friends, closest friends. And Kelly in Vegas was there. Matt Humans, Benjamin Lee Eckstein, a big sports writer for many, many years, Jim Feist. We were all there, and we got to talk about Dave, and it was a blast. And we had such a good time talking about Dave, and that was a good 2 or 3 hour night. And it's just amazing how many people he trended on Twitter.
Yeah.
The day he passed away, he was trending. Yep. He was top 30. He was like right up there with the Olympics. It was crazy stuff. So,
guys, we Taylor Swift to run for her money too. Way to go, Dave. Yeah, gave Taylor Swift to run for her money too on Twitter. There you go. Way to go, Dave.
I tell you what, I could talk 20 shows, 3 hours a show. So I'll wrap it up with that. Unbelievable guy. Never made anybody look bad on radio. Dana, I started the same way. My first show with Dave, I was first of all in awe as a young guy here in Vegas. I was probably looked a little intimidated, trying to remember everything I had rehearsed for. And he saw it. And he just carried me through it. And he talked to me about things he knew I knew. Big 8 football at the time, things like that. He knew I knew those things. And he made it the most comfortable, debut with a big legend that you could imagine having. But like I said, we became such close friends. He couldn't eat anything solid the last 8 to 10 months. So we'd bring him, my wife would make him broth. He loved pork bone broth, just the broth because he couldn't have solid. Run it over to his place, give him the broth, and he's, oh man. He's like, you could tell he's all happy. He gets something besides protein drinks. But one of the best guys you could ever talk about or meet, by far, as good as it gets in this business. A hero of mine and a legend, no doubt.
No question. And such an influence to everyone in the Las Vegas area, the sports betting community abroad. There's no doubt about it. And just, one of the first. I think of people like Dave Cokin. Like obviously we lost Dave Malinsky. We think of even Mark Lawrence, who's been around a long time. These are all some of the pillars of the sports handicapping world. You know, the guys that were really trailblazers in this industry and, you know, paved the doorway and pathway for everyone, including me, Dana, Alex, and countless others. There's no question. And man, some of those stories were great, Scott. And he will be missed, Dave Cokin. There is no question about that. Rest in peace, Dave Cokin. Like I said, you will be missed. I thank you, Dana. I thank you, Scott, for joining us and for these memories of Dave Cokin. Certainly, Alex and I, we second and third and fourth that we will all miss Dave Cokin, and no question about that. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. This has been our special Ice Guys Patreon exclusive, remembering the life of Dave Cokin. Thank you for joining us.